Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working on Chapter 8 tonight. The focus of Chapter 8 is to talk about an important HTML technology called tables. Here are the learning outcomes for the chapter. So we'll learn how to build some basic tables, configure all the different sections of a table, and then learn how to style it as well. And then we're going to learn a little bit about what we call pseudo classes in CSS. We're going to keep ramping up, both our HTML and CSS skills here in this chapter. First thing I'm going to say is an HTML table is this thing that actually has been around for a really long time, and the grand point of a table is kind of to mimic, and I'm bringing up Microsoft Excel here, is to kind of mimic really what a spreadsheet does for us. So if you guys, I don't know how much you've ever worked with Excel, but academically, a lot of people, especially when you're like in, let's say coming out of high school, there's probably not a lot of reason why you would even be prompted to learn about spreadsheets. Normally, if you learn about any of the Microsoft Office products, you're learning about Microsoft Word or something like that. And Excel is kind of like an afterthought, but Excel really is what I call the killer product of the Microsoft Office suite. It is like the most powerful tool. It's used a lot for doing organization of information, doing calculations, doing data analysis, charting, graphing. Oh my God, you can do so much more, but that's kind of scratching the surface. But the whole concept of a spreadsheet is that we are working with what we call tabular data. And you can see I'm kind of like bouncing around the spreadsheet here with my arrow keys. But basically, the information in a spreadsheet is arranged in rows and columns. You can see all the rows are numbered, all the columns have letters as headers, and what's really nice about it is if you're entering information, and I'll just give you an example, like if I'm doing like first name, last name, address, city, state, maybe zip, maybe you'd have the phone number, maybe you would have an email address, etc. And these are basically logical organizational breakdowns for information, right? Pretty common ones. And normally what we do when we're working with a table is we might do something like this. We might, think of these as like column headers, and then we would enter information underneath. So for example, I might like say like John, like Smith, something to that effect. And maybe that person's in Racine. And then we'll just make up like a phone number here. And we'll do the whatever at a.com. Right. And that's not really an email address, but hey, of course it tries to send anyhow. But the whole point is that you're grabbing information and you're organizing it into rows and columns. And then often what you'll do is you'll add more information. So you add another person, another person. But the point is the information is organized and it's structured. And you can tell that, I've been like kind of like tweaking, for example, how the information is sitting here, because some of these are pretty longer than the boxes that I had. So I adjust their width. I might like make the header look a little bit different. The data might look a little bit different. Generally, the point is this is what we call a flat file, or tabular information is another way we refer to this. And that's just a fancy way of saying that we're working with rows and columns. Right. Now, if you think back, we were talking about the flex stuff last week and how we could maybe put like a number of different items like in one row on a web page, and then they dynamically adjust. And that's what Flex does. Before we had Flex and we would try to control layouts on websites, we often use this thing called tables, even though tables originally were added to HTML to allow for this kind of functionality. So I'm just going to kind of like, I'm lazy here, right? So I'm not like generating a real spreadsheet, but this is kind of what spreadsheets do, right? They organize their information in rows and columns. It makes it easy to sort stuff, to search for things. And then I know that each column of information holds like data, and then each row of information has information about a singular entity, right? So very useful. It makes it easy to look at information. If you think, for example, if you're like into sports, right? Like you might look at like the standings for your favorite sport each week, like to see where your team sits in the standings, right? And that information is often put into a table. So I'll just give you an example. If I go to the NFL website, and actually I'll do one better here. I'll just say NFL standings. And so it just comes up in Google. So I'm not going to the NFL website, but notice how they have the information arranged, right? Do you notice the rows and the columns of it and how it's organized? And for us as people looking at the information, we look at it and go, oh, okay, I get it, right? It's organized. There's like headers. The teams are here. Their wins and losses, percentages, and all their details are in columns, and all the columns are consistent. So in other words, the win streaks, the away record, the home record, points for, points against for every team are in the same column. So the information is organized. It makes it easy to look at, right? And this type of structure is particularly useful when you're looking at things like numbers, right? So, accountants, for example, will use a spreadsheet a lot, because it's easy to look at the information. Now, if we use a spreadsheet, keep in mind that a spreadsheet has another thing where I can like take anything that's numerical and do calculations with it. In fact, even just my highlighting here, it show it, Excel on the fly does some math. I don't know if you can see that down here, my status bar, but HTML won't do that, but HTML does allow us to organize stuff into tables. And when you do that, you can add this like orderly look to your website if it's appropriate, right? So when they say tables are used on web pages to organize tabular information, this is what they're talking about. A spreadsheet is tabular information, right? Rows and columns. And here's kind of the interesting thing about it, why they call it tabular, because if I want to move from cell to cell, you use your tab key in the spreadsheet. Isn't that interesting, right? All right. So rows and columns, similar to a spreadsheet, each individual table cell is at the intersection of a specific row and column. Okay, that makes sense. And you noticed in Excel how rows have a number, columns have a letter. So if I go to like this particular cell, I'm in cell B4 right now. And notice what Excel does is it puts a little thing up there. It says B4, right? So if I type something up here, that's going to go into that cell, right? Because that's the cell that it's on, right? So this is just, simple spreadsheet stuff. Basic table structure is configured basically with these three HTML elements. Table, right, which structures the whole table. Then we have TR for the table rows. And then instead of what you would think would be TC for table columns, they have table data is what that is, or whatever. But these are the individual cells. These are the rows. And I'll show you how that works, but it still breaks down into rows and columns. So for example, if I wanted to make a list of all, let's say my friends or family's birth dates, I could maybe put together a table like this and then organize it. And this is a really, really basic and primitive table, but the point is you can tell that what they're trying to do is make this a header row, right, that describes the column. And then this must be Jack's birthday and phone number, and that must be Sparky's. And once again, like information goes in like columns. Um, and so for organizing information just the way we would in a spreadsheet, but we want to put it on a web page, tables are the way that we do it. All right. So I am going to go into the coding here, but let's talk about the tags first. So take a look at these basic tags, the top three being the most important ones, by the way. First, we have the table tag that'll define the table structure. Then we have the row. So the row defines one row going across. And then each of the boxes inside of a row. So for example, the name box and the date box, each would go in a table cell. So first I'd make a row, and then I would put the data cell inside of it. Now there's also a caption tag, and the caption is kind of useful too, because it basically adds a description of the table above it like this, right? So that can be a very, very useful piece as well, depending on what you want your table to look like. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this sample code that they have here. And I want you to be mindful of the fact that this extends over 2 PowerPoint slides. So it starts here, but it doesn't end until the next slide, basically. But notice we have an opening and closing table tag, and all the other table tags go inside of it. Up at the top, if you're including a caption, and I say if, I would not call that obligatory, you would put the caption right inside the top. If you want it to appear, guess where? At the top, right? Makes sense. Then what we'll do is we'll declare one row. Notice the TR tag, open and close. And then inside the TR tag, there's 2 TDs. Each TD represents a cell in the table. And you can see the graphic here, right? So you can see name is in the first row. This is the first row. It's the first cell. The second cell is date. Then we move on to the next row, right? So here's another TR, open and close. And then 2 TDs. One says Bobolink, right? Bobolink. One says the date, right? And so what happens here is this structure, when you look at it visually, you can see those correlations. Here in the code, it becomes a little more difficult to see it, but not so much, really, right? So basically, the first cell of each row should be the name of the bird. The second cell of each row should be the date. The other thing I'll have you notice is that the table rows and cells are consistent in structure. So all the rows have 2 data cells, right? And as long as you stay consistent, there's 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here, then your table will also be consistent. So one thing you have to be careful of when you're building a table is that if you're building a table with, let's say, like 3 rows and 2 columns, that you maintain the correct structure. Because it is possible, like for example, let's say you forgot to add this, and then you would have these 4, 5 cells in this spot would be empty. So it creates kind of a little bit of a problem. So let's go ahead and try to build a table then. The first thing I'm going to do is I am going to get my stuff open here inside of Dreamweaver where I'm doing my coding today. And we're still working in Unit 6, so I'm not making a new folder. I'm considering this part of the same effort, basically. And what I need to do first is figure out, okay, where should I put a table on my website? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go locate my stuff in the folders, and I want to open it up in the browser and look at it there to make that determination rather than do it inside this product. So, oh yeah, I'm in my Prometheus. Let's see, I'm not even following my own file structure here. There we go. So all my stuff is here. So I'm going to go ahead and open my website in the browser. This is what it looks like right now. I'm not saying it's great. It just is what it is because I'm doing a bunch of demos, right? We have this weird page. We have the gallery page. which doesn't do anything. So that's a blank page. We have the contact page. So I think the gallery page probably needs a dummy page. I don't know if that would be the good spot to put the gallery. I mean, I suppose that's possible. Or I have my whatever page. So maybe I'll make a whatever page. How about that? Right. And so let's go ahead and build that. Okay. So what I'm going to do here inside of my folder, I'm going to take a page that's blank. It looks like the contact page is pretty blank. And I'm going to copy it. So I'm just going to right click copy, right click paste. And then I'm going to rename it. And I'm going to call it whatever, because this is just kind of a page I'll use for whatever. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what's going to go on this yet. Like if I had a really clear vision of what should go on that page, like maybe relative to this website or this concept, maybe this could be a table that would show a list of all the discoveries these people have made on Oak Island. That might be a clever thing to do. All right, so that might be what I do. So I have created the page now, and now when I go back to my editing engine and I look, I should be able to refresh, and there's the page. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the code view of the page. And the one thing I will have to do now is on all my pages, I'm going to actually have to make a link to whatever.html. And so here I am. I'm going to open up all my pages now and make that fix. Right. And I'm doing this just to keep my navigation consistent, by the way. Okay, that's just a whatever. All right, so I think all of them are good now. So now I have 5 HTML pages. Test is just an empty page, or 4 of them. And instead of saving them each separately, I'm going to use the save all command in my tool. If your tool has that, Visual Studio Code does have that. If that's what you're using, you can save all your pages at once. But this way, I'm making sure that this is consistent navigationally. All right, I'm still going to be working on the whatever page, so I'm just making sure that that tab is the one highlighted. And I'm going to I'm just going to say, hey, this page is under construction, folks. All right, so the basic approach to building a table is like this. And I'm just going to kind of demonstrate the basic tags. So use your table tag, open and close. And then what I usually do is I split them like that. And then I'll indent, and then I'll put in a table row. And in fact, if I know I need a few table rows, I'll go ahead and add them all right away. But all the table rows, once again, I'll also split apart, and I will put in the number of columns that I want as table data cells. So I'm just building the first row here. And notice what I'm doing is I'm trying to be clever, so I'm not like reinventing the wheel constantly, basically. So I have one row created in my table with 2 columns with this code. So if I want to add more rows, now all I have to do is paste and paste. All right. So now I have a table with 3 rows and 2 columns. All right. I'm just going to go ahead and say, I don't know what we're going to put in here. What, NFC North rankings, maybe? Should we do that? Yeah, I
That's what
think
I'm
that might
actually
be.
doing. I'm actually doing it as while we're doing this. I'm doing NFC ranking.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? So I'm going to do that. NFC North rankings, and you know what? You could do the whole NFC. You could do. I mean, this is a great idea actually for practicing with tables. Is you could do all the NFL um, standings as tables, totally, right? But we're just going to focus on the NFC North now. How many teams are in the NFC North? 4, right? This is not a football quiz, by the way, but um, As a Packer fan, you're obliged to know these things. Or a Lions fan, sorry, they're one. All right. And then what columns do we need? So if we're going to do like rankings, what's like the standard approach? Number of wins, number of losses, the percentage, right? That's at least you do that. So how many columns is that? Well, I have one for the team name, right? One for the wins, one for the losses, and one for the percentage, right? And that's enough for us right now. So let's create inside each one of these rows two more columns. So we'll have four in each one. You see the consistency here, right? The top one, well, now I'm thinking, well, one of the rows at the top, that has to be the one that holds the header that describes what we're looking at. So I actually need one more row. Right, so I'm going to add one more row. So I've got 5 rows. The top one's the header. So here I'll just say team. Do we just use W? Yeah, let's just use W for win. Right, because that's what they do, I think, for regular standings: win, loss, and then they usually do like PCT for percentage, something like that. Okay, so this will be the header row at the top. Then, of course, I better look at what the standings are because I do not have them memorized. All right, so we got Lions, Packers, Vikings, Bears. All right, now keep in mind that this is the first column, second column, third column, fourth column. So we're going to go Lions, Packers, Vikings, Bears. And right now I'm not looking at, by the way, I'm not looking at any of the values here, but I think I saw that the Lions are 6-1. The Packers are 6-2. I don't have the others. 5-2 for the Vikings, 4-3 for the Bears. What was that again? I already forgot. 5-2, 4-3. All right. 5-2, 4-3. Okay. Then we needed percentages. That's a little bit more challenging, but we can extract that from here. So we got 8. Okay, how about I'll do a little trick here because I don't want to be flipping my screens back and forth. I'm just going to do a screenshot of this information. And really I should have win loss tie, but whatever. Ties are so rare. All right, so we have these percentages. So I'm just going to move this off on my other screen so I don't have to flip back and forth. I guess I could have moved the info to the other screen, but I guess that would have taken forethought. So not happening in my brain today. So we got 0.857 for the Lions, 0.750 for the Packers, 0.714 for the Vikings. And sorry, Bears people, 0.571, but they're still above 500. So I guess that's not too bad. All right. So now we have all the information put in. I am going to save my work. I'm going to go back to my browser and get brave and take a look at what I created. So I'm clicking my whatever link. Oh, I got to reload the page. So, right. All right. So there's my table. And okay, here's my first reaction to it. I'm highly disappointed. It doesn't look nearly as nice as the one on the NFL site. However, right. So even though this has issues, right? So here's some of the issues that I would point out is first of all, the header row probably should be bold or something. It should look more prominent. This could maybe be a different font. table would look nicer if it was maybe a little wider, right? Maybe formatted differently. You know what? And I'll tell you what, we're going to get to that point where we do all that stuff to it. But flip side is all the information is there. How big are the columns? As big as they need to be is the answer. However, I can control the size of the columns, and we'll learn how to do all of that. But folks, here's a basic table. Now, I'm going to show you one of the reasons why coders often will use higher end IDEs. And I'm not sure if Visual Studio does this, but Dreamweaver sure does. So if I wanted to insert another table, Dreamweaver just has a tool on the menu that I bring up, and I just say, how many rows and columns do I need? Well, I need 5 rows and what was that, 4 columns, right? Table set to 100% width, which is normal. This one has cell padding and spacing added to it, which we didn't do. And then I'm just going to click OK. And then I want you to notice what it does is it pre-creates a table for me that's empty. This is kind of interesting how it like indented it here, but I'm going to indent this stuff so you can see it. And I will also have you notice, oops, that it also added some stuff in here that we haven't learned yet about, like a table body tag. But generally speaking, look how quickly and easily the tool created it. It's not, tables aren't hard to create, like if you do it manually, but if you have a tool where you can just click a couple boxes and say okay, and then all the code for the table is written, now your job is basically just to add the contents in these spots. I will have you notice though that whenever they have a blank cell, they add a space inside of it. I'm not sure why they do that. I think that's just to make W3 validation happy mostly. All right, but case in point, we do have a table. If you have a tool that automatically generates one, you can create it that way. I'm okay with it, right? And I'm not sure, once again, if Visual Studio Code does that. If you were using full-blown Visual Studio, it certainly does it. Dreamweaver does it. I think WebStorm, Brackets, probably the Phoenix editor, I think that they call it now. All of those higher level tools tend to do those actions automatically. But here we go. I mean, in terms of just like the basics of getting this stuff on the screen, and I'm going to just zoom out a couple of clicks here so you can kind of see this all at once. But here's the whole darn table, right? That we created. So if you guys need to like screen capture that for your work, go for it, right? One of the obligations you're going to have, so we have an assignment in this unit where you do have to build a table. And then when you're building your final website project, I would like you to have a table somewhere on your website, right? And for some people, it makes more sense than others. But there's a number of different ways that you can use tables, you know, and it is an important HTML skill because there are lots of situations, and I think like the standings that we see, like on that NFL site, is proof of it, right? I mean, because if you're going to look at like the standings of sports teams, do you want it just to be a mishmash of data like in a paragraph? You want to look at it in an orderly fashion so you can compare like with like, and you know, apples with apples and oranges with oranges is kind of the grand point of it. But that's the general approach. So just kind of review really quickly. Table tag holds the entire table. TRs contain the rows. TDs inside of a TR declare the number of columns, right? And you want to make sure those are consistent. The caption, which is optional, can add auxiliary information like we see here, right? Here's an example. Once again, this is a 2-column, 3-row table, like the one they're showing here. And then, of course, we have the one that we just built, which is a 5-row, 4-column table, right? 4 NFC teams plus the header row. All right, so that's the basic lay of how to do a table. There are possibilities here to add borders to your table. Now, there is for example, um, the old school way to do this, and I'll give you an example, right? I can go right to the top of the table tag here, and I can just use the old HTML tag, which is an attribute called border. And then I would say one. What size is that exactly? Well, here, let's just take a look at the live view. And it basically does this. And notice how it's got like the same kind of lines that we see in the PowerPoint. So this is a border of 1 pixel, right? And it's done the old school NFL way. Now, whether or not you like the look of that, it is what it is. But that's how we used to do it, by the way. So, and what they're saying is that that method of adding it as an attribute is obsolete and you really shouldn't use it with HTML5. However, and I say this real frankly, HTML5 was also built to be backwards compatible, right? So it still works. It's just not recommended. What they're saying is the better way to really do it is to create a CSS style to control that. And if you want, you can just copy this, right? That's totally doable. And you'll notice using the CSS syntax that we can then go back, we can eliminate this border attribute, basically leave all the styling out of the HTML tags, and then go to our CSS file and then find a logical spot in here somewhere. And I'm not really sure where that is, but I'm probably going to say, I don't know, maybe right around here somewhere seems like a good spot. I'm just going to paste that in, do a quick save on it, and then take a look, and we still have borders. Now, of course, because we're doing it with CSS, right? Here's the other kind of nice feature of this is I can make it, I'm going to try to like split my screen a little bit more efficiently here. I can make it a bigger border. I can make it a different color, right? And I think I have to invoke the color panel this way. And maybe what I'll do is, there we go, color picker, and I want to make it like, red, choose that color. And then you can see, I can make the borders whatever I want them to be. Now, once again, I'm not saying this looks good. I'm just telling you that this is stuff you can do. And you know what? You don't have to have a border. And you don't have to have the border on everything, right? Notice how this still puts it on everything comparatively, but it does still apply a border, right? So you can control it, and you can control which elements get the border too. And we don't have a TH tag right now, but that would get it as well. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint here. All right, so now they're going back to another example here where they have a table, and what they're trying to do, right, is instead of, and I want you to notice the TR tag here, instead of doing a TR with a table data cell or a regular, cell, they also have that TH tag, which is a table header, is what that stands for. And you know what? We have one of those, right? We have a table header. So what we could do here in our table is in this first row, we can change all of these TDs to THs. And I would have you be really methodical in fixing those, by the way. And kind of the point of this ultimately is the fact that as we kind of mess with this, and you'll notice I'm saving both this and my CSS, and then really the live view needs to refresh here. And let me go back to the browser view on this. So I'm going to do a refresh there. I'm not sure why the bold wasn't showing up inside of Dreamweaver, but here it is in the regular browser. Notice that by switching those to THs, It centered the text and made it bold. All right, looks a little better ish, right? This is, mind you, these are all opinions, right? Whether or not this looks good or not. The other thing that I'd like to do is, I really am not liking, frankly, the borders. So I'm probably not going to use the borders. I'm just telling you that up front. So I'm going to come inside here and I'm going to comment out the borders, at least for now. However, I might want to add some other styles. So I'm going to kind of make a little bit of space here. And what I apply those styles to is going to be highly subjective. I really don't know yet. So I'm just going to put this on the table tag for right now, right? And what I'm thinking about is, like, I'm not liking the font either, right? That's in there. So I'm going to choose a different font family, and I'm going to choose something, maybe like this. Okay, so I'm just choosing this different font family. I'm saving, back over to the browser and refresh. All right, I like that better. So you see, these are the kind of tweaks you'll be making. All right, we will keep working on making this look better. Okay, but it's going to be a one step at a time thing, as you can tell. And then I'm not sure if I can make it look as cool as Google did, but I will do my best to try. All right, so that's what a table header does, right? Just change that first row to THs, right? Um, some other things that we should talk about, and they kind of go through this, um, so in terms of like attributes that we used to add to tables, and I want you to notice all of these say obsolete. However, even when I created the table inside of Dreamweaver, it added cell padding, spacing, and border, I think, automatically as attributes. And so in other words, I can take any one of these, and I'm just going to like demonstrate really quick, put them in my HTML code like this, right? So I could do cell padding equals, I don't know, 10 or something like that. And that will, when I save this and go look at it, right, add space inside all of the cells. So here's one way you can make it look a little more loose or easier to look at, right? And so that puts like, um, you know, that spacing into those table cells. Now, the point of this is not the spacing that we're adding. The point is that this is considered obsolete, and there are replacements in CSS to allow you to do that. So we really don't want to do it that way. So if you see old table code where they're using alignment like left, right, center, they're doing BG color, this is highly deprecated, border, cell padding, spacing, summary, or width, all of these are really considered obsolete at this point. You really shouldn't use them. The big however is I do see these three in particular, along with the width. So those four are basically still being used a lot by coders, and they still work, but you're not really supposed to use them, right? So this is for the whole table, right? There's also ones that are meant for the cells, right? So once again, they have some of the same ones. So they have the alignment, the background color, and notice they have regular alignment, which is the left-right alignment, and then they have vertical alignment, which is the up and down alignment, and height and width. All of these are considered obsolete or deprecated. And deprecated means that it's in the process of being removed. So it still works, but you really shouldn't use it either, right? There's these other two that are used still because there's no other real functional way to do it. And these are column span and row span. So we're going to look at these really quickly, and then we'll come back and we'll look at CSS for controlling all the other stuff that we called obsolete. But for right now, the focus is going to go to these two items. Okay, so let's look first at the column span and what it does. And so I'll show you the result first. Here's the result of a column span. What if you want a table where on one row you just want one cell, right? And in the other rows you want two? Well, what you do is in the one row where you only want one, you say right in the first data cell that you want a column span of 2, right? The other rows still have 2 columns. The third row has 2 columns, but the first row only has 1 TD, but we told it to column span 2, and then that gives us this result. Now, I don't want to like mess up the code that I did here with Dreamweaver, but what I could just very quickly demonstrate is I can make a copy of this table. So I'm just going to copy all that code and put it down here, right? And it did copy so beautifully, but whatever. So I could, I don't know, we could maybe do something goofy like add a row. I could remove 3 of these. And I don't know, I'm just gonna something goofy like that just to say something. And then inside here, I'm going to do a column span. So COL span. And now how many columns am I spanning? There's 4 total columns, but I'm only declaring 1 here. So I have to say a column span of 4, right? So when I save this and take a look, I'm going to go back to the browser to look. And I want you to notice what happens. And you don't see this because I don't have borders on it, but that one row became one single cell. Now, what I could do, and this is another tip, even though the border element is obsolete, what I do tell people is that when you're building a table, throwing the attribute in here like this is sometimes helpful when you're building, because then you can see the boxes, right? So this is why I like to use it in some cases. But notice what I did. This has a column span of 4 as one table data cell, so it allows me to traverse it, and once again, superfluous information, but the point is to show you the technique. So this would be a column span attribute that does that. Now they do another little weird thing here is they talk about the row span. So what if you wanted to accomplish this? You wanted individual rows here, but you want one to span 2 rows. Okay. So the way that you accomplish that is basically the same technique, but this takes a little bit more thinking because you have to kind of almost maybe draw this out. What I'm telling you is row spans are a little bit more challenging to do than column spans. So here I still have the 2 columns that I need, but on the first one, I'm saying a row span of 2. So that tells me in the next table row, I only need 1 data cell like this. So I'm going to demonstrate this one as well. I'm just going to add it to this other table. So like, for example, we could do this, copy the row with the bears, and we'll call it, I don't know, something, because I can't think of anything basically. And I'm going to just put like zeros in here because this isn't really the relevant part. Just make that all zeros. And then we'll do one more row. And on this one here, I'm going to say row span equals, and I'm just going to do 2. I think that's adequate. That means that the first cell here isn't needed, so I can remove that. Okay, so now let's save that and go take a look. So I'm going to refresh and notice, right? So this is a row span of 2. This is a column span of 4, right? What I might use this for, I have no idea, right? But relative to this information, it doesn't work. But this is to show you the technique, right? So this is an example of column span. This is an example of row span. All right. What I'd like to do now is like we're already an hour in. We're going to take a break. So let's do that. Let's take a break and then we'll come back in about 5 minutes and then press forward. All right, we're back from our break now. We figured out how to um, not share sound when there's a screen share happening because I was watching a YouTube video and apparently that was bleeding into the recording. All right, let's move on with our slideshow and keep moving forward on the material here. We have some more slides that we need to finish up. Um, Now, one of the reasons that, if you notice, like they have like the th tag and it changes how stuff looks, but there's kind of a secondary reason um, for having a th tag, because this kind of fits with what we call the semantic web or semantic HTML, which is kind of a polite way of saying that the tags that you're using to structure your content should indicate what kind of content you're holding. So, for example, if I have a heading on my page using like an H1 or an H2 or something like that, makes sense because those are heading tags, right? So that we know um, that we're looking at a heading, right? The other thing that happens is in a table, often columns need headers, so we know. So there's a semantic, aspect of this. In other words, the tag itself indicates what kind of content it has. However, if you wanted to, have tables that were maybe a little bit more complicated, is probably the polite way to say it, and you need to maybe have multiple table headers, and you know what, using those like NFL rankings, I think is probably not a bad way to look at it, because if right, we can kind of tell, like for example, this row here is really the table header, but that repeats a few times, right? So it's not unusual that you might have a header in multiple spots, and this is all one larger table, right? Um, and so that's kind of part of the point. Now, if you do have tables that get really complicated with their content, what they recommend that you do is, you can use the table header thing to kind of make those evident, but you can also use the ID on table elements to make them unique, so that when you're doing stuff. So let me just kind of demonstrate here. So for example, one of the things that they recommend, and this is all about accessibility, right, in the semantic web, is like, even though that we can see that this table header contains the name, what they're recommending is that you give it an ID that matches what the column header is, so that when you are coding for it later, I could take everything in that column or everything in that particular cell and style it, right? And this is kind of an accessibility thing, so please keep this in mind. The other thing is, if I'm putting in information in a regular cell, adding this attribute, which indicates what column header it belongs to, is considered a good accessibility trait as well, right? So in other words, bobolink is part of the header's name, and the date is part of the header's date, right? And that continues. This is an accessibility thing. And the more complex your table gets, they say the more you should use this. Okay, so I'll speak from a practical standpoint now. I rarely see coders do this, right? They say it's a good practice, like maybe if you were building a website and you knew you were going to have people with special needs looking at it, that you might follow through and do this because it might be required because it's like a government project. But generally speaking, people are not adding they might add IDs, but they usually don't attribute it to headers. That's from the practical standpoint. All right. All right. So if we want to actually go ahead and style our tables, there are, all these attributes that we were looking at before, which we were told basically not to use, right? They said obsolete or deprecated or whatever. you can instead use the CSS properties. So, for example, if you want to do an alignment, like center align a table, you could use this approach. If you want to uh, align stuff within a table cell, we would just say text align center, but then you would have to apply it to a different spot on the table. All right. So let's kind of experiment. Let's kind of go down this list and experiment with all these styles and try adding some of them. So I'll start with the alignment one. And I don't want to be looking at that. I want to be looking at this right here. And all right, so we're not going to work with this, sample table below. So I'm going to add a couple more line breaks here. We'll just move it down. And you know what? I'm just going to say sample table. It's not going to be the real deal, right? So that one we're not going to mess with too much. What we're going to do all of our work up in this one. And the first thing I want to do is I just want to apply that style to the whole table, kind of like they did on the PowerPoint. In fact, I might just borrow their style. So I might just take this, right? And actually what I'll do is I'll just grab the stuff inside. Let's copy the stuff inside because I already have CSS created for table, right? And so I already picked the font, and now I'm just going to do a width of 75%. 75% of what? Whatever thing it's sitting inside of, right? The margin set to auto, it's the same as saying left, right, auto, but this is auto on all sides. This will center it on the screen. All right, so let's go take a look in the browser if I can find the right browser. All right, and let's refresh. All right, so notice what happened. Now, keep in mind, this is my sample table down here, and this is my working table up here. This is the one I'm really focusing on, is the top one. All right, well, you know what? It did center it, and it made it bigger, made it a little less congested. So I think that overall looks better. But here's some of the problems I'm noticing is this table header cell is centered, but all the teams are on the left, right? These are all centered. These are not. So these three columns here are not centered, right? So I might want to actually take all of these cells and adjust them, right? So that they are centered. And these are the kind of goofy things you're going to start like picking up on and trying to adjust, right? And so I'm going to start by taking all of these and giving them a class declaration so that I can adjust them all collectively. So this will be the second, third, and fourth data cell in each row. And I'm going to give them all a class declaration to kind of control them. So here's how I'm going to do that. So in here, I'm going to come in, I'm just going to come up with a class, and I'm just going to call it, I don't know, how about FB data, football data. That's what I'm going to call it. I'm going to take that class statement and the space preceding it, and then I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to paste it inside all of these TDs, right? But I'm not putting it on the team. I'm just doing it on the information parts, so the numbers basically. We do that for the Packers, the Vikings, and the Bears. And you got to say it like that if you're talking about the Bears, right? The other thing that they recommended, right, is that we give these all IDs, so we could do that. So I could, for example, I could give this an ID of team, ID of wins. Oops, got to get it inside double quotes though, folks. It doesn't help that my cursor is right there. ID losses and ID. I'm just going to go PCT on that one for percentage. Okay. And actually, maybe I'll even truncate this and go win loss percentage, make it really nice, short and concise, right? All right. And then we have all of these set. Now we just have to do some styling. So I'm going to save my HTML back over to the style sheet. And I'm trying to think about all the things I just added. So let's go ahead and put in, well, I have all the IDs, for example, like team, and I should probably look at the thing and try to figure out what's wrong before I go trying to fix it. So what I'm noticing is team, I probably want to left justify that. So I don't want it to align in the center like it is. So I'm probably going to say text align left, right? So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to say, so this is an ID, so it'll be # team. And then I'm going to say text align left, which is not what it's doing currently. Let's save it and refresh. All right, so there it is. Okay. Now we're going to apply all of these columns and get them to center so that it goes underneath each one of the things correctly. What was the class name that we used? Yeah, FB data. And for these, we're going to say text align center, like so. Once again, saving. Back to the browser refresh. Not too bad, right? It's getting there. Okay, maybe not as slick as Google's, but we're, it's a process. All right. Another thing I might want to do here, and I am going to play with all the different styles that they're pointing out, but I basically just demonstrated to you how you can like center cells individually or collectively, right? Using classes or IDs. The other thing that might look nice on this table is maybe that top row could have an underline, right? So if I was to do that, what I would probably do is I would come up here and okay, let's think about how we would apply the style first. So if I look at the HTML page, I basically want to put an underline under this row. If I apply that to all the TRs, then all the TRs have an underline, which is not necessarily what I want. So what I am going to do then is I'm going to come here and I'm going to give this an ID and I'm going to call it FB HDR row. So this is football header row is the way I'm thinking of it. All right, so saving my HTML back over to the CSS. So this is an ID. So we're going to # football header row, curly brackets. And then what was the point of this? Oh yeah, we want to do a border on the bottom, right? I just want it on the bottom. And then I'm going to make it, I think I'm going to make it kind of thin. So I'm just going to go like 1 pixel. Solid is fine. And then, sorry, I wanted to do a color in there and I want to just use the color picker. There we go. And what color do we want? Something kind of darkish like that. And there it is. So I'm just saving this and let's go take a look. Refresh. Refresh. It's not refreshing. All right. All right. Let's see if Dreamweaver is showing that. Dreamweaver is not showing it either. And actually, this is not refreshing here. Okay, so that's not working. All right, so that's not good, by the way. So I wonder why it's not working. Let's see if we can figure it out really quickly. So I'm going to just go into code mode here. And what if we just try black and give it a much thicker border? And actually, maybe the smarter thing to do here is see if we can just get border to work rather than focusing on just the bottom. All right, let's go back to the live view. I still have nothing. So this is a little perplexing as to why it's not working. Nothing in the browser either. So I'm going to actually go into inspect mode here and see if I can have the inspect tool help me figure this out. This is one of the reasons why we use this tool, by the way. Right. So in this case, I want to kind of narrow down to the tags that I'm working on. So I'm in the main section. I'm working on this table, right? And I'm looking at this particular entry, which does have okay, so I mean it's reading the style, but it's not displaying it. So I'm not really sure why it's not displaying it. I'm thinking it might be because it's conflicting with this. So this, am I saying border 0 somewhere? I guess is really kind of the question. Okay, I think I have a thought as to how to fix this here. So let's see if my suspicion is right. I'm just going to kind of look at my code a little bit more. This border is not happening. Okay, so that's kind of putting it around those. Do you see what I did there? All right. So I just named the tag. So now I'm going to just put it on the TR. That's not working. What if I just do this on all TRs? Does that work? It does not work. Okay, so it's just not working on TRs. So let me control Z that. And then let's make it a border bottom. Okay, it's got those little gaps in there, but you know what? I might be able to live with that. And then I can just kind of switch it to kind of what I wanted, which is 1 pixel solid black. You know what? That looks okay. Let's just go with that. All right. And I don't want to spend that. That's not really my main point here. The main point is to experiment. Let's refresh. I must not have saved. I did not. So saving and refreshing. So here's what it looks like in the browser. Right. But you have to admit it is getting to look a little bit better. Right. Absolutely. All right, let's keep moving on here. So we did alignment. We can also do background color. So for example, I can do a background color on cells as well. So maybe that row would have a background color and oh gosh, let's actually make it black, but then we'll need to make the font a light color and we'll go antique white. Saving, back to the browser, and there we go. What do you think? Yeah, it's not the greatest thing in the world, but you know what? Case in point is that we're applying the styles, right? So this you can do background colors on cells. That's kind of cool. All right, let's try a couple more styles. There's cell padding and cell spacing. So cell padding would basically be the space inside the cell, so inside the line to the content. The cell spacing is the space in between. You can see by default, there's a few pixels of space in between everything. And so I'm going to set both of these, and I'm going to do this for the whole darn table, by the way. And maybe, I'm thinking about it. Maybe is that the smart move? I'm not really sure that's the smart move, but you know what? Let's try it and see what happens. So let's do a little bit of padding, and let's go something like 10 pixels. It doesn't have to be huge. Let's take a look at this. All right. So on the table with the borders, right, that seemed to work okay. right? Can we even see the difference? And I'm sorry I'm bopping around so much, you guys. Let me go into split mode here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to strike this. Okay, so you see what it did? So that's padding. I'm not sure I'd necessarily like that, but here's the thing. Where is it adding the padding? It's not adding it, you notice, inside the cells. It's adding it on the outside edge of the table. So this is not the right spot. I'm going to strike that. Where we really want that to be is on all the table data cells. That's what I'm thinking. So for all the TDs, I'm going to put in a padding of 10 pixels. Now check out what it did, right? So I'm going to just cut that, right? It goes from that to that. Now, whether you like that or not, I mean, this is an opinion, right? Maybe 10 pixels is a bit much. Maybe you think that's perfect. I don't know, right? I'll leave that on you. I'm going to say that if we're doing that in the TDs, we better do it in the THs. So now we're adding it there. So that's padding inside the cells. I don't think that looks too bad. That looks all right to me. Right. All right. Let's also try the cell spacing, which is border spacing or border collapse. You can use either one of those. I'm going to go with border spacing. And so what that's going to do is it's going to add space in between the cells. That one I'm not so sure that we need a lot of. So I'm just going to just say border dash spacing, and we'll use a small value, maybe like 5 pixels, and see if that does anything. And I'm thinking it's not going to do much because that might already be the default. And so I'm cutting it, pasting it back in, and it doesn't seem to be doing much of anything. All right, let's change this amount. Let's make it much larger number. I want to see the effect of it. And I'm not seeing that it's doing anything at all. You guys feeling that? So maybe this isn't the right spot to put that. Maybe the border spacing should go on the table level. Let's put it there. Yeah, so there you go. Look at what it did. It really spaced the stuff out. Let's look at the top table, right? And I'll remove it without, with. Obviously way too much, right? Let's make it 5. And then let's cut it and put it back. Does it help? I don't know that it necessarily helps in this scenario. So I might like omit that, but you might want to play with it. I think down here you see it more dramatically because you see the space in between the boxes. But real frankly, I don't think I need that one. I'm going to leave it there, but I'm going to comment it out. I just don't like it. And these are choices that you will be making, right? All right, moving on. So we did alignment, background color, padding, spacing. Now let's do height. So we can actually control the height of some of these cells. And like, for example, if I want to make all the THs taller, right? So that whole row, I could have a separate style for TH, and I could come in here and just declare a height. And I can just say, I want that top row to be 100 pixels tall, like that. Okay. Do you like this? No, I hate it. But, you know, the case in point, you can do this. You can control the height. You can control sort of the width too. And in this case, I would be really careful. I would not really change the width of any of this stuff because I do like the way it's sitting. But I do notice, so this is like the goofy stuff I look at. All right, why is width wider than, or wins wider than loss, and then percentage is wider than both of them? Wouldn't it look better if they were all the same width? I think so, right? And maybe you guys agree or disagree on this. But if we style the stuff that's in the first row up here all the rows below should follow, right? So in other words, if I style the top row, that will kind of adjust the others. I'm going to remove the height on this one. Once again, I'm not going to use this because I don't like it, but if you want to play with it, there it is, right? Sometimes it's fun to just play with stuff, but I want to get these three columns all looking identical. So I'm going to go back to my source code to start with. And what I'm looking at is basically these three columns, right? So I already have IDs on these. So maybe I can apply to win, loss, and percentage the same style. So over to the CSS, right? And so I'm going to just put it here. I'm going to say win. Oh, wait, these are IDs, right? So # win, # loss, and # PCT. I want to set those to a consistent width. What that width should be, I'm not really sure. So I have to do some educated guessing here because I can set the widths a few different ways. One way I could do it is I could just put in a hard-coded value, and that's just what it'll be, right? That might be the best choice. I'm not sure yet. We should refresh this. Oh, this isn't refreshing because my CSS is not yet saved. And of course, my CSS is broken at the moment. So here, let me remove that. Save again. I want to look at it in the browser to see what we're getting here. All right, so this is where we're at right now in the browser. And I'm going to go to like a zoom out level here. So there we are. And when I look at this table, how much of it should be the team and what percentage should these be? So for example, could these each be 20%, 20%, 20%, and this could be 40% potentially, right? So I'm going to try using a percentage. So here's my first try. I'm going to say with 20%. Saving. And I'm going right to the browser to test this. There you go. So basically what I did is I said, each one of these is 20%. Therefore, the team column is automatically 40%. Now, maybe, and I'm just saying this out loud, maybe 20% is too much. It did make them all consistent, but I think they're too big, right? So maybe half as wide is better. So instead of 20%, let's make that 10%, save it, and refresh. And there you go. All right. I like the way the win, loss, and percentage is starting to lay. And you got to remember, I'm kind of using this as my guide, so they have a lot more information, right? So they would have to accommodate for all of that. But hey, for now, this isn't too bad. Maybe the width of the overall table is a bit too much. Maybe 75% isn't right. Maybe 50% is right. Or better yet, maybe I don't want like a percentage at all. Maybe I want like to set it at like a certain pixel count. So let's take a look at that. Okay, too small, right? So let's go, I don't know, 500, saving, refresh. There you go. All right, so I think that looks all right. But notice, because I put that on the table, the other table does the same thing. So you might want to be more selective than that. And if you're going to use a bunch of tables, instead of applying it to every table, you just want to give the table an ID and apply it specifically to that. So why don't I do that actually? And so instead of using that generically on the table, right, I'm going to just instead give it an ID. I'm not sure what the ID should even be yet. Maybe we'll call it ID. What would this be? NFC North. And I would say rankings, right? And here's kind of a tip too. Like if you're labeling an object, you should label it what it is. It's like what does ID 1 2 3 mean? I don't know. when I say ID NFC North rankings, that's very, very clear, right? And so I'll use that then to define my style here. So we want to save the HTML, and I'm just going to do a # NFC North rankings. I'm going to copy these styles over. So I'm going to cut those. I'm going to put them here because I know they work and I like them. So I'm going to save those. Now let's refresh. And notice the other table now is back to its old ugly self because I'm not styling it at all. And my new table is starting to look much better, right? I still got tweaks I want to make, but you know what? I generally like it. It's all right. All right, let's keep moving ahead on those styles. All right, so we have also vertical alignment. So sometimes when you put contents in a cell, and probably the best way I can demonstrate this is I'll use my extra table, right? Like let's say I'm here and I have, you know, it's all about the Packers, right? Let's do this. Being a little excessive on purpose, by the way, right? And so watch what happens in the lower table here. Now I guess I put it in the upper table, but notice how like all the contents here, right? I added the Packers and I made that really verbose. And then look at how the other stuff sits. Do you want that information to sit in the middle? Because that's the default. I can adjust the vertical alignment. So that's what this is about. So I can do vertical align top, and then it would move the stuff to the top. I'm not going to demonstrate that one. I just want to show you why you would do it. So I shouldn't have done it on that table, but hey, whatever. It is what it is. Right. And if I guess what we could do is I could put it here, right? And then here, I'm just going to put in, let's call it a class, and I'm going to call it VA top, vertical align top is what I'm calling it. Saving the HTML, back to the CSS, and where am I going to throw that in? It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to call it dot v-align top, curlies, and then I'm just going to say vertical align top. I'm going to save it. Now we're going to go back to the browser and take a look. So here's my Packer thing. And instead of the scores sitting in the middle of the row, they're sitting at the top. Basically, that's what that command does. Not a great example because now this table is like super wide and you don't really see it as well. But you'll notice that when you're looking at weird data, basically. All right, moving on. We also have the border, right, which we played with a little bit. And this is one that you have to experiment with a lot, I think, to get right. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. All right, you also can do a background image. Now, this is kind of weird, right, because we haven't really done that yet. But so I can put a background image on a table data cell. Yeah, you can totally do that, right? So like I can take any one of the little boxes in the table and there can be an image inside it on the background. So like if I wanted to have like this cell be like grass, for example, I could do that. So I'm just kind of giving you guys ideas. I'm not demonstrating it, but it's easy enough to do just like you would on any other CSS thing. All right, so next, to demonstrate this next little technique we're going to show you, we have to talk about a concept in CSS that is what I would call a pretty technically advanced skill, by the way. But we've kind of played with what we call pseudo classes already, and we didn't really kind of identify them as such, right? And I'll give you the example. When we were styling our links in the navigation, right? And I created a hover effect, when I added this part to the code, and I'll zoom in just a tad here. This is what we call a pseudo class. It's not really a class. And this is basically a collection of other pseudo classes. Notice all of them start with a colon, and then they allow you to apply styles to objects without naming the objects. This is why we do it. That's why we call it pseudo. It's not really a class. It's still, I mean, it's attaching to objects in a way other than naming them. So, I mean, we've been going through the process of like, I'm putting IDs on stuff and I'm putting classes on stuff so I can apply styles collectively. And then, I'm doing it by name. These allow us to apply styles without naming any of the objects, which I think is what kind of makes it cool. So these pseudo classes are a little bit weird, but I'll explain what they mean. So for example, it says first of type. So in other words, if I have a row in a table, and then there's a bunch of data cells inside that row, the first of type, for example, if I looked here, so, all right, let's just look at the THs, right? So I'm inside the table row, and the first of type TH is the first one, right? The first child, well, that would be the same thing, basically. It says it's the first child element of a selector. So this is the parent element, this is the child. These are all children, but this is the first child. So first of type in this tag, or first child inside that thing, kind of synonymous in a sense. There's also the last of type, or the last child, which points to the last item. So I can refer to it that way and then style it separately. And then we have nth of type, parentheses n, and what goes in the n is the nth element of the specified type. So the values you could put in here is, for example, I could put in odd or even. So if I did odd, it would grab the first and the third. If I did even, it would grab the second and the fourth. Or if I said, hey, I just want the fourth one to be colored a certain way, right? So then I could just put the number 4 in here. So I could say TH nth of type 4, and it would grab the fourth one on the page and style it that way without me putting a class or an ID on it. That's pretty slick, right? So now, if you wanted, for example, to zebra stripe your table, and this is kind of a thing that people do with spreadsheets, is sometimes they alternate the colors of the rows. So when you're looking at the data, you know what data you're looking at, especially if the row gets really long, right? So I'm just going to borrow this technique precisely. I'm just going to copy it from here. Why not, right? Rather than retype it. And I'm going to add it to my TR tag. So every even TR will have a background color of whatever that is. So let's just drop it in our code. I'm going to my CSS here, obviously. I'm going to find the area where I have all my table stuff, right? And I'll just put it right here. Doesn't matter where it goes, right? So this applies to all TRs, nth of type, even, whatever this background color is, which looks like a white, right? All right, saving, back over to the browser and check it out. It's not quite a white, it's like an off-white. But you see what it did. And maybe even isn't the right one. Maybe we do it with the odd ones. Let's do odd. Save that, refresh. Oh, okay. All right, so you had a really, really long list. Having alternating colors can work. It helps people look at it, right? I'm not sure I dig it. To be real frank, I'm not sure this is the great look for me. And you know what? If you wanted to make the even ones one color and the odd ones a different color, you can do it. Or if I want, I could just put that color on the third one. So here's the refresh on that. Is that what you expected? You expected it to be the Vikings, right? But in truth, this is a row, row, row. So that is the third row. And I like that one because it highlights my favorite team. So, so there you go. Like if I wanted to point out where the Packers sit in the rankings, and aren't the Lions playing the Packers next? Is that what's going on?
This Sunday, up the third. It's gonna be a good game.
Yeah, and Goff is hurt, or is he pretending to be hurt? Right. That's a tactic in the NFL, right? Yeah, it will be a great game. I really look
Yeah,
forward to it. It's probably the highlight of the season so far for me, for sure.
100%.
Yeah, right. And we got bragging rights next week. All right. So I know we're being kind of football nerdy now, but hey, it's the thing. All right. Especially in this part of the world, right? You can't live in Wisconsin without
100%.
without being a football fan, it seems. It's like required, right? All right. Another thing that they came up with um, for working with tables, and real frankly, I'm not one that uses this a lot, but I can see why people use this. So the same way that we take a document and we break it into like a header, a footer, and a body or a main, they also do it with table tags. And I'll just have, like, for example, the first row in your table has got your THs. These are the headers, right? But you can also wrap a head tag around it, and then you can style all the stuff inside collectively. And you know what? I'm going to try that. So let me go to my coding engine, wherever the heck it is. Here it is, right? And this is my header. I'm going to do this on the keeper table up here, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take all my table rows and I'm going to indent them one level because I'm adding another level of encapsulation here. Basically, I'm going to create a T head. Oops. All right, let's try fixing that. T head. There we go. So open and close. I'm going to grab the closer here and move it just below the first TR. You see what I've done there, right? So I put the header row inside a head thing. And okay, I'm going to save my HTML. And now I'm going to go to my style sheet. Remember that border I was trying to put in before? What if I now apply it to T head? I can do, for example, border, bottom, three, and make it really pronounced here, 3 pixel solid red. And it's going to be pretty hideous, but whatever. And let's go to the browser and refresh. And it's still not working, right? So that it doesn't like to do what I want it to do, right? But did it save the HTML? HTML saved. Yeah. So border bottom, it just does not want to apply to that. All right. But what I could do with that though is I could um apply different styles collectively. And maybe if I did a regular border, it would work. Let's see. Nope. Just not doing it, folks. And I would have to like backtrack all the stuff I did here. All right. So that's because I have a border. Okay. So it's all like conflicting with each other. So that what I just recommended here, bad. Don't do it. Right. Um, all right. So, but you could style stuff collectively using those tags. You could also use the other tags that go with, and once again, these are kind of semantic tags. So you can use the body for the meat of the material. And then you could also have a footer as well, right? So like if you wanted to have like a bottom row with information, so you can do a T head, T body, T foot. I would call those optional, not required. But if your table is complex, and it has maybe information that looks like this, right? So this would be your caption, this would be your head, this would be your foot, and it would allow you to kind of collectively style things if you wish. All right. So we are done with this chapter. So the lecture stuff is going to end right now. So I'm going to pause the recording. All right. Now, we have discovered in this chapter that using this type of technique on a website is useful. It really is. I mean, there's stuff that you can do here to make a table look orderly, to convey information. And this type of information is really a perfect, to me, example, because we are working with information that needs to be organized. And when we're comparing values, this is super, super helpful, right? Now, tables, though, historically have had other purposes. And what I think is really kind of interesting is like having now seen like how you do layouts, or starting to see how you do layouts on websites. And when those layouts don't always behave, another thing that people used to use tables for, and I'll have you think about this, is they used to structure their whole websites using tables. So they would put everything on the web page inside of a table, and they would like set up like navigation and headers and sidebars and little sections, right, using all the table code. And why did they do that? Well, in the old days, before CSS was even a thing, or when CSS was young and inconsistent, it didn't work the same across all browsers. What a lot of web designers would do is they would put all the page content in the table, because with the table, they could absolutely control it and it would look consistent in every browser. So we would put a whole web page layout inside of a table, right? That technique kind of faded away when CSS came out, and then when CSS got good, and I think more like around the early 2000s or mid 2000s, right in that range, is where the CSS started to get better. By the time we got into the 20 teens, CSS3 was out, and then we could really control our layout with CSS, and people completely abandoned that approach. But up until the early to mid 2000s, a lot of people would structure their entire websites around tables, right? Not that I recommend that you do that. And I don't think of like too many people are doing it now, but the technique actually still works, because no matter what browser you're in, a table is dynamically adjusts in size. So for example, like if I watch this like goofy table at the bottom, right, where I have like no sizes or widths declared, and how that just dynamically adjusts, doesn't care how big my screen is, it just works, right? And the same thing was true with layouts. So tables are still very useful. You don't want to use them for layouts, but you do want to use them for data like this, right? And depending on the website you're building, it might be highly appropriate. All right. All right. So that will basically conclude then the chapter 8 lecture on tables. So this video ends here.